welcome to today's episode of Revolve Commercial Podcast. I'm your co-host for today, Samantha Riley, and here with our commercial real estate expert, Mish. I feel like this is going to be an awesome episode because a lot of questions have come in around no money down deals, and you did mention it on the last episode. And we thought, we put our heads together and I thought, well, why don't we actually dive deep into this topic? Why don't we talk about it?
Yeah, and a lot of people ask me about this. A lot of people want to know how can they buy commercial real estate without any money? And generally I say, oh, it's very complicated, and I'll do a show one day and I'll expose how that's done. So today is that day that finally we're getting to talk about no money down deals.
Yeah. They're a super creative way to buy property. I've not done it before. I've bought a business this way, and it worked out really, really well for us, and it worked out really, really well for the vendor.
Yeah, and it's very dependent on what the deal is, on who the seller is. And I always say the most important thing when you're purchasing a property and you're really getting to the granular level, find out who the seller is and what they really want, what's
Mm-hmm.
motivating them to sell. You have a lot of sellers out there that are just selling right now because the market's hot, and they
Mm-hmm.
just want to get out at top dollar. You're probably not going to be able to do no money down deals with those kind of sellers. But if you
Mm-hmm.
find, particularly, I'm going to say people that have been in their buildings, businesses for a very long time, it's very, very popular with owner occupiers. So
Mm-hmm.
if you find an owner occupier or an old couple, let's say, that have been in the business for quite a long time, and they need to get out for various reasons. I think you and I spoke about a situation where you bought the business on one of these
Mm-hmm.
no money down deals. Tell us a bit about that because that was very interesting.
Yeah. So at the time, the vendor of that particular business reached out to us, and we already had another location in the same industry within our city. And she reached out, and we certainly weren't in a position to buy, but
Mm.
we asked a lot of questions, like exactly what you just said. Why do you need to sell? What's the motivation? And it turned out that the vendor's husband was terminally ill and they wanted to exit very, very quickly. So, of course, it was a win-win for us to be able to help her out, but we didn't have the money to buy the cash up front. But by asking the questions and really understanding her motivation, it actually worked out better for her for us to be paying it off on a monthly amount because she obviously was able to go and look after her husband and still had that income coming in. We actually negotiated it. I did not tell you this bit, Mish. We negotiated it with 0% interest because she needed to get out. So
Wow.
we, as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to, it was a win-win, but we
Yes.
came out on that really,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really well off. But the biggest thing I can say is really understand the vendors' motivators and ask them what it is they want. Because
Yes.
sometimes they'll tell you that
Mm.
what they want is way better than what you could even conceive.
Yeah, and way better than what you were prepared to offer. I mean, you were
Yeah.
probably prepared to offer quite a lot, and it works out. It does work out well. So it really is one of the fundamental keys to purchasing. And you've heard me say this 1,000 times before, that purchasing a commercial property is like commercial purchasing a commercial business. Very similar,
Mm,
very, very similar.
mm,
And of
mm.
course, the 10 million differences, different types of properties, different types of industries out there. So it's not it's not a one size fit all. You really do have to
Yeah.
be creative when you get into the negotiations to discuss that. But well
Yeah.
done, Sam. That was a good outcome for you.
Totally. I don't know if you know wealth dynamics, but my secondary wealth dynamics profile is deal maker. I love to make a deal. I'm just like, let me at it. But anyway, I love that you mentioned that this is creative because it is really creative. There's not one way to do it. So let's dive into some of the different ways that you can do no money down deals. Can you sort of walk us through, I guess, like, what are the ways?
Okay, well, let's just go through them one by one and let's just nut down and see what we can come out with. So, the first one that I'm thinking of is seller financing.
Hmm.
And seller financing is probably one of the easiest ones. So, we're going to go from the easiest to the more difficult. Okay,
Hmm.
the vendor acts as your lender. So, in other words, they finance the property, and instead of paying the full amount up front, the buyer agrees to pay regular payments to the seller. And this would often be at an inflated interest rate, so a little bit higher
Hmm.
than the market. So, you're paying a slight premium for having somebody else pick up your risk,
Hmm.
realistically. Um, and it's something that is agreed upon. Now, often behind the scenes, outside of the first tier lending halls, there is quite a lot of room for that kind of negotiation. And I think my biggest takeaway here on all of these is to be big-minded. Okay, you cannot be small-minded. You can't go into this and try and negotiate a sharp interest rate because you're just going to
Hmm.
fall flat. So you need to be big-minded. Look at the bigger picture. You need to see the opportunity. What is the long-term opportunity? And that's what you're focusing on. So that's a win-win for everybody. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah. So it really is, when traditional financing is not available, when you can't afford it, you don't have enough deposit to purchase the property. If you've got a very motivated seller and they want to sell fast, you're giving them more money ultimately. Maybe a little bit, maybe they're getting their money a little bit slower. And just like in your situation, your
Mm.
circumstances, they'd be pretty willing to go ahead with something like that.
Yeah. What are some of the questions from your perspective that you would ask to find out about how motivated that seller is? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can pretty much read into it. There's a situation that we were in the last year or two where, again, it was an old couple. And in conversation, in speaking to them over a period of time, you can pick up where their motivation is. So this couple had established a business, and again, owner-occupier. They'd worked in it together, husband and wife. They'd bought the building, their business expanded, they bought the building next door. So they were selling both buildings. And he had a little bit of a stumble. They were in their mid
Mm.
to late 60s. So, they're reaching that sort of retirement age and they wanted out. They wanted to retire. They'd bought their caravan and their ute and they were ready to go, traveling
Yeah.
around the country. And it was a matter of negotiating how this could work best over what period of time, what would work for them, what would work for you in the whole process. So it's those conversations, and they're friendly conversations
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
I found out about his condition. She also had a condition, and they were tired. They'd been working this business for
Yeah.
25 years. So again, very suitable to them because they had ongoing income for a period of time. It worked out for them, and it was a win-win. Everyone was
Yeah.
happy.
It really is about just having conversations and listening, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yes. Have those
Yeah.
conversations, find out from them. And it's also about, they might not have thought about these kind of options. So, worst thing that can happen is they say no, that they want a chunk
Yeah.
of money and they want you out their life. But if you package it correctly, you can get a really good outcome. It's
Mm.
it's about
Hmm.
the conversations, how you do that conversation.
Totally. All right, let's jump into the second one, and this is lease options or rent to own. When is this an option?
All right, so this would be often, I'm thinking of one property in particular. It's a beautiful studio where the tenant has been there for quite a couple of years. And the owner, again, is getting on. He wants to let go of the property. And they came up with a rent to own situation. So she continued to rent the property. And then she paid a little bit more in proportion which was credited towards the purchase price. So they decided on a purchase price. before all of this happened. It was a
Hmm.
discussion. Again, this is all about communication. Sam, this business is not about bricks and mortar and buildings. It's about communication. It's about
Oh,
relationships.
yes, absolutely.
So they had a sit down, they had a chat about it, and they said, well, she couldn't afford to purchase the property outright, and how can they do this? So this strategy allowed her to purchase her property and allowed him a soft exit as well. So it was a
Hmm.
win-win. They both helped each other out. Um,
Love it.
and it allowed her time to improve it. She actually put a capital investment in and turned the studio around. It has turned it into an absolute beautiful space. She's added tremendous value, and all she's had to do is pay for that renovation, and she knows that she's putting money in her own pocket, at the end
Mm.
of the day.
Is there a time that she needs to come up with that deposit though to be able to transfer the property over and finalize that deal?
Yes, so they would have a cut-off period, and again, open to negotiation. Could be 24 months, could be 12 months, whatever is suitable and equitable for both parties.
Hmm.
And it's all in. There's nothing that's fixed in stone. It's nothing that's cast in stone. It's all about the negotiation. Who wants what over one period, what period of time you negotiate that out.
Mm, mm. So what I'm hearing or what's coming up for me is that that does need to be a really open and honest relationship where you're constantly thinking, how is this a win-win? Because in my mind, if you tried to, let's say, screw that person over or, really push hard for something that's maybe a little bit unfair, it's going to blow up in your face.
Absolutely. And that's what I said right in the beginning. These are mature, reasonable relationships. If you're that kind of person that's trying to squeeze every single cent out of the deal, don't even bother doing this. Don't
Yeah,
even go
totally.
there. You need to be very open-minded about it. You've got to be very collaborative about your thinking. And don't try and be mingy
Mm,
and squeezy, you know.
yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
And that's why I
Um,
said this is it's a long-term plan. Look at the greater benefit for both parties long term down the line.
Love it. What's the next, I guess, strategy that you've got on your list?
Okay, so the next one is subject to financing. Now, there are quite a couple of areas with subject to financing, and subject to finance could be, well, you put that in a contract. Any contract that we do, we always say subject to finance. Okay, but
Hmm.
this one in particular is where the buyer takes over the existing mortgage payments. So you don't take over the mortgage, you just take over the payments. And this is often without formally assuming the mortgage. So the seller keeps the mortgage in their name, but you pay for it. And you might
Hmm.
pay them a little bit more for it, depending on the circumstances. So the buyer gains ownership of the property and the mortgage remains in the seller's name. Why this works and how this works is if, for instance, a business or a seller is in trouble and cannot
Hmm.
meet their mortgages. And you basically solving their problem. So you taking over their headache, you taking over their debt, essentially, for a period of time so that they can recover and they can get out of it and you can take it over. So you don't
Hmm.
have to put down a huge deposit and you can negotiate again that interest rate. It could be at an interest rate which is slightly lower than, what they're paying, because in this kind of situation, you're helping them out.
Yeah.
But all of this is in negotiation. And again, don't try and squeeze them or squeeze the seller out of it because it's not going to work well. You really want to go in toe to toe on taking over that mortgage. And
Yeah.
again, period of time, you decide what the period of time is. What you're basically doing is buying somebody else's problem. So
Hmm.
in all of these instances, you're purchasing somebody else's problem. You're giving them a solution to their problem.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this happen successfully?
Many occasions. On
What
many
it, what
occasions.
was what was one of the motivators for someone being like this? Like you mentioned they're in trouble. because the more I thought about it, it's been answered.
So I have just answered it. And Sam, again, in conversation, when somebody sells their property, you don't know what their motivation for selling is. And if you're not asking the right questions, it could take you quite a while to really, really, really find out what their motivation is. And you'll find out what their motivation is from other questions. So
Mm,
in discussion, like, how long have you had the building? How are you finding the finance? Is it affordable? Has it worked out for you? How long is the lease? Who's the tenant? How do you find, is the tenant's rental paying, covering your mortgage? Now, that's a question that most people wouldn't want to ask because it's quite a
yeah,
personal thing. And you'd have to be at a level of communication, of openness before you can ask that question. And, if the seller's saying, oh, well, I'm finding it a little bit tough, and that sort of comes out that it's not really washing its face, there's your buy sign.
yeah,
Then you're going to have a look at why. Okay. Um, and also it's got to be financially viable for
favorable.
you.
Hmm.
Are they locked into maybe a interest rate that's too high? Could you get interest rate that's a lot lower? Is it because the tenant's not paying their rent? So these are all burning questions that you really need to ask and find out before you go into something like this.
Yeah, because I think listening to you speaking about this particular strategy, the first thing that came up is people like you need to really have some rapport there because some of these questions could actually almost push the vendor back, like, oh, I just don't want to have these conversations. So
Mm,
there's
mm.
got to be some rapport there first.
Absolutely. You really got to build up rapport. I can think of an instance where we did one of these, and what happened is the vendor had purchased another property, and he was a developer, so he desperately needed to get into the other property. He was on the hook for the other property and needed this one to move. So we negotiated in such a way that and it was actually quite a short period of time, it was only 6 months, where we managed to negotiate that, and it was a win-win all round. We got his property, he moved into his new one, he had the finance to go off and do that. So it really did work out well.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about private money or hard money lenders because I think when you're talking about no money down, this is kind of where people's heads, I find, normally go. What do you find?
Pretty much, this is quite different though. This could be
Okay.
called bridging finance as well. So short-term loans, pretty much what it's called generally, where you've purchased a property or you're on the hook for a property and you need finance just to ensure that you get the property. Look outside of the box. Now, you'll have private money that you're going to pay quite a lot more for. So in today's market, you could expect to pay between 9 to 11% for that private money. But if you look at a deal and you know that that deal stacks up and you really, really want it and need it, and short-term lenders are not going to give you finance for it, this is a strategy to do that. And often I say to people when they're buying, look at the longer picture, look at the bigger picture. So if you're buying, for instance, vacant property, this could work on vacant property because your first tier lenders, you're not going to get good results with first tier
Mm-hmm.
lenders. You can go to second tier lender. And if you know that you can tenant that building for a pretty good rate within a certain period of time, then this is a great strategy. Yes, you are paying a little bit more for it, but the vendor wants out, gives yourself some time to get a new tenant in, and that's where you optimize on a strategy like this and you optimize on a vacant property. It's great for a vacant property.
What's a situation where if you, as the purchaser, knew that it was going to be easy to find a tenant and get them in at a good rate, but it was vacant, like why would the vendor not have done that?
Couple of situations, couple of circumstances. The one that I'm thinking of in particular, the property was tenanted. The vendor and the tenant had a blow up. And
Okay.
it was at the point where the tenant could have taken up an extra option. And the tenant basically said, I'm not going ahead. The vendor was committed on another property already, thinking that the sale of his property
Ah,
was going through. So he was now stretched. So it worked particularly well. The price dropped because the property was now being purchased vacant. So there was
yep.
a price drop, which allowed the buyer to purchase a really good grade quality property at a lower price and pick up a little bit more risk, pay a little bit more in the interest rate, and then find another tenant that would go in at the same or higher rental. And then the strategy with that would be to refinance it. The minute you get a tenant in there, you refinance it and off you go again. And
Yeah,
generally you'd
nice.
be refinancing that at a lower rate, far lower than second tier or private lending.
Yep.
And then you've got equity to work with again.
Yay, happy days.
It's all
Um,
happy days. So all of this. You
yeah,
just need to know how to do it and what to do.
exactly.